so much for coming to the second panel today. I'm very excited about this one. I'm very excited to hear what Mr. Horgan and Mr. Malloy have to say. So we're all just going to quickly introduce ourselves, and then we're going to get into some questions, and then if the audience has any questions, you guys are welcome to ask. It's kind of a small group, so please, whatever really comes to your heart, please feel free to ask. So an introduction for myself. My name is Kathleen Muggeridge. I am the Vice President of Operations for Young Professional Catholics of Toronto. I'm also a Youth Coordinator at Champion Life Coalition, and I'm also the Regional Director for the Progressive Conservative Party Women in Politics, Ontario.
My name is Raphael Fernandez, also known as Rafe. I'm the other moderator of this afternoon's panel. I'm a lawyer in downtown Toronto. I'm also involved with the Young Professional Catholics of Toronto, sing in my church choir, various Catholic organizations and otherwise. So just to start off, we might ask both of our panelists to introduce themselves, both some biography, but then also what brings them to Catholic conscience and to this afternoon's panel, a little bit of perhaps perspective or why you're interested in Catholic social teaching. So I don't know if you want to start.
Sure. Thank you very much. My name is John Malloy. I'm actually the director of the Center for Public Ethics at Martin Luther University College, which makes me a Roman Catholic working at a Lutheran institution. So it's great to be. I was also the guy with the question mark up on the front level. So I think that's because they asked me if I'd be in the, or they put together the agenda before asking me if I'd be on the panel. But I was really happy to be here today. No. I just thought the question mark was because a few people asked me about it. But I come to this discussion as a recovering politician. I am currently in an academic milieu, obviously, but I was a page in the Ontario legislature at age 12 and quickly became enamored in politics. I can say in front of this crowd, I was a Catholic from southwestern Ontario, which automatically makes you a member of the Liberal Party, especially in the early 80s. I became involved with the Young Liberals. I ended up, after doing the academic thing, I got a PhD. I worked a bit at Queen's Park, but then I went and worked federally in Ottawa. I was there for about 8 years. I worked for a series of cabinet ministers and ultimately spent 5 years in the Prime Minister's office. And then I looked around at all these politicians and said, hey, maybe I could do it, not be Prime Minister, but maybe I could be a politician. So I returned home to Waterloo Region, southwestern Ontario, and I was elected in 2003 with the McGuinty sweep and became a member of provincial parliament. And in 2007, I had the privilege of going into cabinet. I served a number of roles: minister responsible for higher education, minister for community and social services, a number of other portfolios. All along the way, though, I was still a practicing Catholic. And as I think has been mentioned by a few speakers today, I realized that there were lots of practicing people of faith within the political world. I used to go to 7:30 Mass at St. Basil's, and the place would be full of MPPs from all parties that were there. And I often thought, what does it mean, the fact that I'm a Catholic and in politics? And when I decided not to run again in 2014, I had this wonderful opportunity to come to Luther, then Waterloo Lutheran Seminary. It's federated with Laurier, just to position it, to come there and to do work in the area of public theology, political theology. And out of part of that experience came a book I wrote called Politics and Faith in a Polarized World, A Challenge for Catholics, published by Novalis in your better bookstores right now, and which looked at this whole idea of faith and politics. And I continue to do this work. My particular interest right now is around polarization and whether faith can have a role with that. And I'm going to give one more plug. We just started a podcast because the world needs more podcasts on this whole issue of polarization with a special look at faith. So that's sort of the biography. I'll just take a minute or two and give you my perspective on the question. And obviously I'm going to focus on Catholics being involved in politics. I'm going to take it as a given that Catholics should be involved in politics, not because that's not a rich conversation, but we've had a number of really amazing presentations already. So I will take that as a given that we've heard lots of good reasons why Catholics should be involved in politics. But I'm also going to flip it around and say I think politics can benefit from the voice of Catholics and other faith communities, partly for democratic reasons. We are a big group of people, and our voice certainly deserves to be heard. The idea of wisdom, I think we bring a lot of wisdom to the discussion. I mean, a lot of the issues that we're grappling with as a society, at their core, are things we've been thinking about for thousands of years. And the fact that actually, not just the recent encyclical, but Pope Leo has been in the front lines talking about AI, more than some of our politicians, I think doesn't show that we're somehow ahead. And there's some fundamental issues underlying them that move forward. And then on a I don't know if I call it a personal level, I don't mean me personally, but I think for people who get involved in politics, listen, there's lots of people involved in politics that have no faith tradition. That's great. But for people who do have a faith tradition, politics is a really, really crazy world where you do lose sight of what's right and wrong. And I think having a faith tradition can give you a little bit of stability and grounding as you move forward. In terms of, and I'll just be really quick, in terms of lessons that I've learned being in there, or the role of faith communities and some of the advice I give to people who are looking to engage in politics. Remember that a lot of times it's priorities more than policy. There's the old joke, someone asked a politician what's their stand on crime, and the politician answered they're against it. Most politicians are against crime. They don't like poverty. They think we should be nice to the environment. The fact is, when you get there, oh my gosh, you get to deal with about this much. There's such limited money. I don't care who's in power. There's such limited time, the capacity of the system to do anything. And you pay lip service. This is not being a partisan shot. All parties pay lip service to a whole bunch of issues, and they can only focus on a few. And the voice of the public in terms of what they should be in pushing them, you don't know how important it is. The number of poverty activists, they get very upset, well, not upset, they get depressed when I say this. You go and knock on 10,000 doors in the course of an election and 2 people raise poverty. Guess what? It's really hard to go back and say we need to make poverty a priority. So a lot of the role, I think, of this group and similar groups is to make things a priority. In terms of policy, because obviously policy is part of it as well in terms of changing policy. My advice is meet the world where it is, meet politics where it is, and it's really interesting. I want to spend weeks going through the encyclical. I'll be honest, I've gone through it very quickly, but there's so much in it about politics, the reality of politics, that this isn't some moral crusade. This is about, to quote Pope Francis, getting your hands dirty and figuring out what's working, what's acceptable, what's moving forward. The rush to sometimes try to impose something on the rest of society, which deep down we know society has no interest in, isn't going to get you very far. But the idea of meeting where it is, working through these issues, realizing that there's different approaches is really, really important. And then finally, I would say one of the biggest calls, and it's not the first time it's come up in this conference, is around polarization. Go to the end of the encyclical. Well, actually, it's through the encyclical. Go to the end of the encyclical. What does Pope Leo talk about? It's about dialogue. It's about understanding. It's I think something Catholics can bring to the discussion, because you know what, we tend to be a little self-righteous once in a while. I don't know if you've ever noticed. And to actually go in and listen and engage and try to understand the other side, not necessarily to always run to the mushy middle, not always to reach some sort of compromise solution that no one likes. But it's going to help you humanize the other side, understand the other side, and understand your own position. And sometimes there is that possibility to reimagine coming forward, but also there's sometimes just a way of just better understanding that this is another human being that oftentimes is trying to achieve the same positive goal. So I'll leave it at that. There's my lessons of how to deal with it as we move forward. Turn it over to my colleague here.
Hi, my name is Phil Horgan. About me, I'm married to Christine. We're in our 38th year. We have 5 children, adult children, one of which is getting married a week today. So I'm really practicing this talk for my talk at the wedding. So if I throw in a few jokes, you are my test audience. I've been practicing as a lawyer in Toronto for 39 years, including working with this gentleman to my left, Raphael. And when I got involved, since John's been focusing on sort of the political game, I think part of the reason that I was brought into this piece was to talk about other civic engagement. And so when I was called to the bar in 1988, we had the first few years of the charter, but we'd only had 3 or 4 decisions that had actually gotten to the Supreme Court. And it happened that I led a group of 540 kids to Denver for World Youth Day in 1993. That's another story for another day. In 12 buses across the continent. Go figure, what was I thinking? Anyway, part of that though was a bit of a introduction to a lot of both young people and some profs and teachers, including Janine Langan at the University of Toronto, married to Tom Langan, professor of philosophy. Janine's one of the founders of Christianity and Culture. And she introduced me to Tom. Tom had set up an organization called the Catholic Civil Rights League, and Janine said, "You need to get involved." And I said, "What is it?" And said that to Tom as well, who immediately made me a vice president, not knowing what it was. But the idea was started there in 1985 by a number of academics to try to provide a Catholic voice in the public square. And so when I got involved, I said to Tom, there's an area where we need engagement, and that's in the court system. And because of the charter, you had this whole new avenue of public engagement through intervener status. So for example, the Morgentaler decision in 1988. Guess how many interveners appeared on that case? 0. Who defended the law? The Crown. And then there was Morgentaler's lawyers, Morris Manning and Company. I'll tell you another story if we have time for the Q&A about the 25th anniversary of that decision at a talk that I attended. But the point I'm making is we now have cases where we just intervened in the Bill 21 reference out of Quebec, which was heard for 4 days in March. I was acting on behalf of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops on that occasion. There were over 50 interveners representing 150 different lawyers intervening in that case. So I was at that front end of that. And what I would do is try to motivate lawyers of my acquaintance or senior lawyers who would be, have a little swagger to get involved in the cases. I would help organize them through the Catholic Civil Rights League pro bono. But we would put together lawyers to intervene on behalf of a Catholic position or Catholic teaching in the public square. And through that, we've now done over 30 cases at the Supreme Court of Canada, probably another 25 at other appellate courts across Canada. We're still involved in a whole bunch of them currently. And that was, I think, the angle that occurred to me as a young lawyer, now as an old lawyer, is still a valuable piece. Now, do the interveners have that kind of impact? Our losses outweigh our wins. But we were involved in, for example, Loyola, which was a win. We were involved as well on the marriage cases at every level in every province that they were taken up. We were involved with a number of the Christian education cases I mentioned, Loyola, a lot of conscience cases that we've dealt with at various other levels. And through that, we built up a coalition of fellow travelers through the Christian Legal Fellowship, the Evangelical Fellowship, Real Women, who doesn't do the court work, but had been doing some of it in the past. And by virtue of that, if you're not aware, most of our social policy is not developed at the political side. It's mandated by a court. The expansion of euthanasia currently is mandated by a Quebec judge prior to the previous federal election that Trudeau's government didn't want to appeal. So it became the law and advanced the slippery slope of people call MAID, I call it medical aid and killing. I think we heard at the March for Life dinner, the Rose dinner last week, a Slovakian politician who fought against their introduction of euthanasia bill, which passed their legislation, but then they organized a referendum to determine whether it would withstand it. Their strategy was interesting. I'll cut to the chase. They won the referendum 53 to 47 when they were all told that they weren't going to win. But part of the strategy was involving the proper terminology. So rather than talking about euthanasia, mercy killing or whatever, they talked about the other side being the poison lobby, which is what they're doing. They're injecting poison into you to kill you. Poison isn't as attractive a word, right? So you call the other side the poison lobby, and you would always call them the poison lobby. And I think there's something to be said for that even now, that if we use better terminology and organize ourselves a little better in terms of taking on these issues and calling it for what it is, it's now the 5th leading cause of death in Canada, if you're not aware. Takes over 5 to 6%. In Quebec, 8% of all deaths in Quebec are through the poison lobby. But there's an example of slightly different. We've been involved in trying to fight the euthanasia advance through various submissions, expert panels, organizing people, and doing that kind of thing. And I was part of the intervener group for our group and others on the Carter case back in 2015. And the reality is, if you're not familiar with the Carter case, the basis upon which the Supreme Court said that there's a right to euthanasia for these 2 women who had advanced ALS was based on Section 7, the right to life. Kind of ironic when you think of it, but it was in effect saying that these advanced women in ALS who could kill themselves legally because suicide was not a crime, it had been delisted from the Criminal Code of 1969. But if they got to a certain advanced point of their ALS, they wouldn't be able to do it themselves, i.e. throw themselves in front of a train or a bridge or whatever the case may be. So they wanted the right to life to be extended and have a physician assist them in their suicide at a later stage. And in fact, in the current hearings that have been held about whether to advance to mental health as a sole condition, Jocelyn Downey, thank you, Rick, supported by the Trudeau Foundation, if you're not aware, testified that, well, we need this advance of suicide or euthanasia solely for mental illness in order to prevent suicide. I'm not kidding. That's the argument. It's Carter, right? We need to prevent a current suicide by allowing them to take their lives with the doctor's assistance at some other time. Odd, but that's Canada. Welcome to our country, right? So there's great need for this continued engagement, and I'm happy to speak about the political side of the Q&A or even now. I find the political demands of party politics in order to get the nomination, to get elected, to get in the caucus, to get positions advanced and so on, is very difficult. It causes great stress in families that John can speak about. It's less so perhaps at the provincial level where you're not taken to Ottawa all the time as an MP. But it's not unlike law school. I often say if you're a Catholic going into law school and you keep your faith through the end of law school, you've done pretty well. Because there's tremendous pressure to suck it out of you. That you're in the minority. You're not on the right side of history. That this is a quaint, mystical viewpoint that you have, but that's not what people say or think. You've got to get on the well, politics is not that much different. No offense to John or any other Catholic politician, but I remember at one time I was being asked by some person at an event where EWTN was seeking a license through the CRTC to be a regular channel broadcaster in Canada. This is 20 years ago. And they said, we need to get organized. We need to organize petitions. And I said, well, that's great. That's tremendous. Can we think of, say, one, maybe two other Catholic positions of public consequence for which maybe we should really get the faithful involved. Oh, I don't know, pro-life, the mounting euthanasia argument that was coming forward, even Catholic education rights, all those kinds of things. And so people get passionate, as John says, about a modest or minor thing, and yes, we can get involved, and yes, we can make impact. But the bigger issues, it's hard because the process demands that you park your faith to the side. And I think part of that, I actually ran for a nomination for federal PCs in 1997. In fact, it was within a week of the birth of my third child, so I was carrying a baby up on the stage, to show I had a baby. I brought my own baby, and I lost, so I didn't have to run, and got it kind of out of my system. But the notion is, even then, it would have been a huge challenge, both for your family life and also for maintaining hard positions. That's why the Catholic Civil Rights League has always been a little bit more appealing to me, because no apologies, I'm bringing forward a Catholic position. And our system has the benefit of 2,000 years. What do you show? And in the context of that, we provided good submissions, relevant, thoughtful, often moderate, but nevertheless are there. And I remember talking to Gwen Landau, because she's been at this perhaps longer than me through Real Women, and I said, Gwen, it gets frustrating. It's kind of depressing. We do all these cases, and we lose Trinity Western, Carter, various others, Saguenay. And she said, yeah, but Phil, remember, some researcher at some point is going to go back and look at, was the argument raised? And at least we can say, yes, they had the argument. We brought forward an argument. We brought forward a position for which there was both authority and deep thinking on how things could be done. Maybe we didn't win that time, and in front of the Supreme Court, which is one of the most political theaters in the country, it remains a challenge. So I'll stop there. I think there's probably more interesting questions about some of the work that we've done in the past and or what we may be working on currently.
Wow, thank you very much for sharing your introductions. I think that after hearing your introductions, this is going to be a really exciting way of attacking some of these questions. And the first one, which maybe Mr. Malloy would like to speak to first, something that I've thought of in the past, and I've heard it raised by other young Catholics. How can and how should Catholics approach voting and just being involved in a political party when they know that the party doesn't align with our values and just Catholic social teaching in general, when the party's constitution in fact directly contradicts our values?
Well, I guess it's sort of an interesting question to try to unpack. Political parties are not churches, are not representative of a particular faith. I think you have an understanding of what needs to be done in the world based on Catholic social teaching. I think we have different ways of discerning, different ways of reaching that. It's perfectly logical for a Catholic to say we should have universal basic income, and perfectly logical for, not logical, but acceptable for someone else to say, no, we don't need universal basic income. And so you reach that point where you have understandings of how we can address some of the issues that are important and should be important to us as Catholics, and then you find the party that, or the candidate that best aligns with it. There is no party we don't have a Catholic party in Canada. Thank God we don't have a Catholic party in Canada. That, I think, would be the worst thing for the Catholic Church. The role of the Catholic Church is not to be domesticated, the role of any church, and to somehow be a part of the state or coming from on high or imposing it. The role of the Catholic Church is a prophetic role, is to be on the outside, is to be critiquing society, is to be able to find areas where what needs to be done is going to get done. And I think it's an imperfect process to vote. It's also policymaking is an imperfect process. And this is theological. You meet the world where it is. You can go to Aquinas. Aquinas talked about not imposing laws on people that people aren't going to accept. What's appropriate? What's acceptable? Where is the public at? And as I said, there's different ways to skin a cat. You're concerned about life. Well, you want to say conception to death. There's a lot in between. There's people who are sleeping in encampments. As a Catholic, I'm really concerned about that. And I'm going to come forward with a list of issues where I think action is possible, where I think there's some solutions that put forward which seem to align with what I believe and my understanding of the Catholic faith, which may be different than someone else's. As I say, I may want a universal basic income, someone else may say, no, we need a different way, but we both want to end poverty, and you vote that way. But I think it's a mistake, and I hope you're not offended to say this, it's a mistake to say, I'm going to go and look for the Catholic party or the party that sort of aligns with Catholic teaching, because you're never going to find that. You're going to find political parties that are all over the map, and I've never heard of a political party that aligns with everything. There's all sorts of positions which you may take issue with, and certainly I took issue with many positions of my own parties.
Thank you. Mr. Horgan, do you have any?
Yeah, I think it depends where you are. In other jurisdictions of the world, there's things like the Christian democratic parties, which are in fact more aligned with the Christian understanding of the human condition. That said, Catholics are perfectly welcome to disagree about economic approaches. And so that makes it very difficult to say that you can have a Catholic ethos within a party that's going to dictate our positions on all sorts of stuff. Even the most important issues like war or not. Catholics disagree if there's been just cause for wars or whatever the case may be. So I don't think, I share with John the concern that if you're looking for the Catholic party, it's going to be difficult to find in this country. Second, it's not necessarily going to attract enough voters or participants to make it, effective. That said, we have one of the most impressive organizing tools in terms of motivating public opinion and or engaging people. It's called the parish system. And the reality is, yes, we're being taught either from a catechetical point of view, from the scriptures, from the importance of the sacraments, and I'm not in any way critical of that. But there have been many occasions where it always sort of occurred to me, we need to have better communication from our bishops and or from our priests, many of whom are just intimidated from engaging, because if you raise the issue, you're going to be criticized. I was in Ottawa I live in Toronto, but I went to Ottawa the second or third weekend of the truckers' convoy, because I had friends there and knew some of the folks that were engaged, found it very peaceful. I had other things to do in Ottawa. But I went to Mass at St. Patrick's Basilica, and it closed down. It already closed down because the trucks were all lined up along Kent Street and made it, I guess, impossible or impractical for people to attend church. Okay, so I went to the Glebe, if you know that part of Ottawa, to Blessed Sacrament Church, where in fact the pastor was Father Tim Nelligan, who I know through the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, which I'm on. And he was talking about on his sermon that Sunday about the importance of welcoming the stranger, about being hospitable and so on. And in the pew ahead of me, a woman busts out and says, "But they're trespassing!" This is during the Mass, right? Woo, this is getting good. And I'm thinking, and so he had to engage, and this was happening because, the people in Ottawa had a very different view of the perception of the truckers and what they were doing. I think the court system has actually come to their side, at least in the treatment of the Emergencies Act, if you're not familiar, because that's going to the Supreme Court of Canada. But Justice Mosley, now the Federal Court of Appeal, has found it an improper use of the Emergencies Act, according to those cases. We'll see what the Supreme Court says, including the Chief Justice, who will not recuse himself, he says, from that case, even though he spoke out against the truckers when it was happening at that time. But I'm just saying, in the context of a mass or other kinds of things, to engage in that political realm immediately creates discord. And part of the church's goal is unity. And so it's easier to be unified on the sacraments and the importance of the teachings without it necessarily saying, this is why you need to support a higher minimum wage, or this is why you need to support an enhanced immigration policy, or this is why you need, in other words, there's room for disagreement even within the Catholic tradition. And I think the categories of conservative, liberal, progressive are probably more aligned with political party organization and management count.
So the panel's on civic engagement, and one of the thoughts that I had approaching this from the Canadian perspective is that I think Canadians tend to be complacent, and that may lead to a lessened civic engagement. I was also, I haven't read it, but I was looking over parts of the new encyclical in preparing for the panel, and there was an interesting quote so he's talking about the principle of subsidiarity, so one of the basic principles of Catholic social teaching. This principle of subsidiarity encourages us to move beyond any form of paternalistic or welfare-based management of societal life, but instead to promote a culture of shared responsibility in a state that values citizens' initiative and a civil society capable of forging bonds and mobilizing energies in the service of the common good. So he's not saying that that welfare programs are bad. He's saying that if we have a relatively too robust, perhaps compared to other countries, welfare state, that may be one of the reasons why I would say perhaps Canadians are complacent or less engaged, because there's a kind of perception that the government will take care of it. So the question is, are we complacent? Do we have this perception? And if so, is there a way in our faith, speaking generally, how do we get across to people, we can't afford to be complacent. We can't just rely on the government to take care of it or something like that. I don't know if you'd like to start or...
Well, I keep starting. I'm happy to
Oh,
start.
sorry.
I'm happy to start.
I was alternating.
So a couple of themes, if you don't mind. So I think, quite frankly, we are really lucky in Canada. Why? Because we have affluence. Affluence. But affluence kills character. It makes you complacent, right? Compare charitable giving rates in the United States and Canada. It's way higher in the United States than in Canada. Do you know what province has the highest level of charitable giving in Canada? Newfoundland and Labrador. Now, they're not as affluent, right? But they actually, what Rafe talked about is that, well, the government will look after it. Well, it's true. We have a social welfare system. We have, even with that, we have homelessness and we have other sorts of difficulties in our street. But the reality is that we are not as giving a people as you'd like to think. Why is that? Affluence. Affluence kills character. And if in fact, you remember 9/11 on the morning of, we all have our own stories of where you were and what you were doing. But the anecdotal evidence being discussed in First Things as well as other journals were that churches were full because people were concerned about their mortality, about whether this was the start of potentially a greater thing, right? And so it's sometimes the pressure that comes to bear with difficult, morally difficult times actually makes us think a little more in a focused way. The old adage that there's no atheist in foxholes. It's because you're facing your mortality, right? Second point on subsidiarity. We just argued subsidiarity in the Bill 21 case. If you're not familiar, that's the case where the Quebec government said no civil servant would be allowed to wear religious symbols. We intervened on behalf of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops to oppose the bill as the Quebec Assembly had opposed since its initiation in 2018. And part of our argument was not to argue about the notwithstanding clause, which was like 85% of what everybody else had to talk about. We talked about division of powers in that Section 91 says that federal powers, 92 of our Constitution says that provincial powers. Religion isn't mentioned. But we had the 50s trilogy of cases out of Quebec, Roncorelli, Duplessis, Samar, and others. Boucher, I think, is the third. And the point is that in those cases, it would kind of fell to the federal government to be the defender of religious freedom. That's when the Quebec government was suppressing the Jehovah's Witnesses pamphleting programs in Montreal and Quebec. Okay, now we have the charter, then we have the notwithstanding clause, part of the charter. That's where it was brought in. We now have other bills out of Quebec passed this year, Bill 9 out of Quebec, which is banning any religious procession unless you have a permit. And the information that I had from a month ago at a seminary, at an event at the Grand Seminaire in Montreal, of the 4 permits that they were aware of, 4 had been rejected. One by a Jesus organization, another by a Portuguese organization. Archbishop Lepin had put in an application for Corpus Christi for next weekend, and as of this past week, I don't know if he got his permit.
Yes.
Oh, he did? Very good. I don't think he was going to care, quite frankly. He was going to process. I don't think it was going to be a situation like that. And in our own parishes, if we're from Toronto and area, you'll have your own Corpus Christi procession, I hope. But it's the other educative function of the law that these things bring on, which is, well, we better not do that because we don't want to offend anybody. Affluence and character, or the oppression of what can occur within the state, and well, we better just mind our P's and Q's and stick to our knitting, and we'll have mass on Corpus Christi, but we won't process around the neighborhood, all right? So those are a couple of thoughts, and if people aren't as familiar with subsidiarity, part of the exercise in short term, and it's been recognized in our Canadian law as a matter of federalism, that you leave to the higher level of government matters that are appropriate for its engagement, and leave to local or more localized areas of government matters that should be left to that situation. And part of our argument was using subsidiarity, a Catholic social teaching principle, at the Supreme Court of Canada, mind you. We effectively said religion and or its regulation shouldn't be left to provinces. It's really a matter for the federal government. And because Quebec had not asked for the consent or agreement of the federal government to bring in Bill 21, or now subsequently Bill 9, that in fact it was ultra vires the province of Quebec. How do you like that, Mark? Now, we shall see what the Supreme Court has to say. I mentioned it's the most political theater in the country. Imagine in this case, 7 of the 9 judges are on the panel, but they're going to be making a decision roughly within 6 or 8 months when there's a provincial election happening in Quebec with a new leader. Legault brought in all of these bills because the polling in Quebec was suggested to be 80-20 in favor of the laïcité secularization program, originally from the Taylor-Bouchard Commission, which talked about accommodation. It's been moved into more suppression and imposition of secularization under the French model, if you're mindful of those developments. And now we have, you're not allowed to have a procession for your religious group unless you get a permit from the city, at least use the city streets and things of that nature. So, you're intruding upon a right to protest, free expression, all sorts of things. But my sense is if the Supreme Court takes issue with this, we're also re-engaging the sovereignty debate, right? Because the records will say, this is what it is. Okay, well, why is it 80-20 polling in favor of secularization in Quebec? My opinion is because Quebecers don't like Muslims. And in particular, they don't like it that since October 7 of 2023, there's been a regular Saturday protest for the Palestinian cause in the piazza in front of Notre Dame Basilica in Old Montreal, which takes you into the afternoon, and then they do the Muslim call to prayer in the piazza in front of Notre Dame. Gets a lot of press. There's a counter protest from the Jewish community. The police keep them separated. And the people of Quebec, we don't want this. We don't want this. Right? And you could argue, oh, it's about Zionism, it's about Israel, it's about, Middle East. Well, you engage the call to prayer at that point. Now you are arguably engaging in provocation. So I'm just pointing out the 80-20 polling, in my view, has been, and I'm not the only one, has been driven by an anti-Islam element But it's interesting, the government response of a Legault government who was failing in the polls themselves was to bring forward these bills because they were trying to hang on to power, right? Legault has now left, they've got a new leader, we're going to go to the polls in Quebec, we'll see where that goes. But there's an example of the civic engagement that was happening, its immediate impact on law and or policy, and how sometimes it's quite challenging for folks to get involved. And keep in mind, the Sunday mass attendance rate in Quebec is less than 5%. It's not the same Quebec that the Duplessis years when those cases came down. So I'm fascinated by the subsidiarity element of our social teaching, but we actually have recognition of subsidiarity in our Canadian federalism law, i.e. what provinces should do and what the federal government should do. It'll be interesting to see if the Supreme Court picks up on our argument, which was used by 2 of the 4 appellants in the case. And it'll be an ongoing situation going forward because there'll be a political response to that, right? Whether that's a sovereignty debate, a new referendum, whatever the case may be. Sorry, John, I took up too much time.
And you know what? I'm going to yield the floor because we got about 10 or 15 minutes and probably folks want to ask questions. So I've got lots I can say on that. But,
Do you want to do like 3 minutes? If you feel like it.
Okay, let's get some questions. I can weave it in.
Perfect.
Of course, by and there, there'd be no question, but no, there's lots of things.
I'm just going to pick up on something that Phil was saying, direct the first part of the question to John and Roy. I hear a lot, and it's relative to that idea, the question, or the point about Canadians being complacent. It's not complacency, it's a sense of futility, because what political parties have become is simply marketing machines. I've had it said to me, there is no room for ideas in political parties. And the proof of that, or a proof, I think, is exactly what Phil was saying, that the party in power, in fact, just to take that as an example, was unable, because it's incapable of dealing with ideas, of discerning between prayer and something and prayer that's being used for a constructive purpose or for an ulterior political purpose. They couldn't, because they're so bereft of ideas. But those are 2 questions that kind of merged together. But would you agree, first of all, that essentially political parties now are simply marketing machines? They are not crucibles of ideas anymore.
No. I think, are there problems with the system? Of course there's problems with the system. If you start a political argument, it always ends with the mirror. Voters get what they want, in the sense that politicians and political parties often mirror what's going on in society. And right now what's going on in society, and I'm surprised, I guess I'm so good, is that everyone's looking at their phone. It's very, very hard to get people's attention. And I think what we're seeing is a political culture which is very much about trying to break through the noise and get people's attention. And the best way to get people's attention is to say something controversial and to simplify it. But in terms of political parties themselves, I disagree. There is room for ideas. Is it as good as it could be? No. I went to Queen's Park, and partly because of my faith, I was very interested in poverty. And a group of us got together. It was quite funny. The Women's Caucus used to meet, and I went along, and we started talking about poverty. So I became I was the best attendance record of the Women's Caucus, and it became sort of an anti-poverty caucus. Out of that, it was funny. Everyone in the caucus went into cabinet. I guess it was a way of going into cabinet. We all went into cabinet. We saw legislation passed in the province. We saw about an anti-poverty strategy. We saw a cabinet committee on poverty. We saw all sorts of work going on poverty because a lot of us felt really strongly about it. And for some of us, not for every single one, it came from a faith background. Quebec, with my students, I always say, what would a thoughtful person on the other side say? And I think if there was someone here who felt very, very strongly about secularism in Quebec, they could probably outline an argument that was very thoughtful. We might not agree with it, but to dismiss everyone in Quebec as being anti-Muslim there's elements of it there, but I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. And I think to dismiss every political party as being just advertising machines bereft of ideas, I think there's a lot more nuance. I think there is good stuff that's going on in political parties. I think the system makes it difficult. Some of it's self-imposed, some of it's the public.
So what are the,
including me.
just quickly, what are the Thomistic roots of elbows up?
I'm sorry?
What are the Thomistic roots of elbows up? You know the slogan?
Yeah. I think that there is nothing wrong with being proud of your country, and the Catholic call for order, the Catholic call for, the chaos that we're seeing to the south. I reject any sort of Christian nationalism, and I think you have to go a long way to see Mark Carney as a Christian nationalist in that comes forward.
Mine was actually like a corollary to what this gentleman was saying, and less about the marketing machines. But I mean, if I heard correctly, you finished your political career in 2014, right?
Yeah.
Would you agree? I think it was already underway then. I come from the federal side. That there's less room for independent voices. And it seems like there's a centralization in the cult of the leader.
Of course,
and so it then becomes that much harder to get our ideas to come through on the public seat, because we have to absolutely align with.
Oh, I agree 100%. At the same time, though, and you'll have to forgive me if I get the number wrong, but there was the letter that came out in the media from 14 MPs criticizing the Liberal Party's environmental policy. I was actually kind of thought, good on them. Not good on them because I necessarily agree or disagree, but good on because there is debates there. The fact that Stephen Guilbeault would resign, you know what? That's someone actually taking a principled stand. There's actually something going on in the Liberal Party where there's back and forth. And if you want to argue about it, there's something going on in the Conservative Party because people are leaving and moving forward. That's kind of what it's all about. I mean, these people that, oh my gosh, the fainting couch, someone's crossing the floor. Well, someone's taking a stand, someone's engaging in
Because
debate.
it's kind of like the only step left to them, right? Because they can't really publicly speak about their
I'm just saying. Yeah, but speaking publicly is not always the best bet. I mean, speaking privately can be very, very effective. And the weekly caucus meetings, I had the privilege of being in cabinet committees, one-on-ones with my fellow colleagues of the Premier. There are ways to push this. But the other thing we need is the support of the public. And if you're interested in poverty, and none of my colleagues were hearing about poverty, and none of them were, it's really hard to push forward.
So we have time for just one more question because we're almost at 3 o'clock.
So I'm just curious, what would be the perspective of politicians failing to listen to their own voters, taking voters for granted? Because that seems to be a core sentiment within the political class. Because we're facing a lot of bad bills right now, and particularly one of the main ones is Bill C9, the hate speech bill they're trying to pass. And anything and everything is hate speech. Everyone's spoken out against it, and they're still forging ahead with it. Another case I can bring up as well is Bill C-222, which is like their surveillance backdoor bill they want to pass. The big tech has pretty much said this is horrible. It's unpopular with the major population of anyone who understands how this stuff works. Yet we have a public safety minister saying, go eat dirt. Everyone's misunderstanding my bill and telling me I'm an idiot for the fact that I want to install backdoors in everyone's personal communication devices. So what would be your perspective saying, or the idea of addressing the narrative of the fact that politicians don't really care about representing people?
Well, I would say the politicians lie awake at nights wanting to represent people. The problem is what representation means. We now, going back to my phones, I don't think any of us want 30 million people. Should we do this measure or not? We could all do it. I mean, we're looking at people who you're elected for your judgment. People said you got to represent your constituents. I talked to my constituents. A third thought one way, a third thought the other way. A third said, "You're in Ottawa, are you? Or what are you doing?" So a third had no idea. So how do you properly represent them? And at the end of the day, there are going to be measures you push forward that you feel are right, that aren't particularly popular. You do that too many times, you're going to be unemployed. So it's a dance, and I mean it's a debate that's been going on for centuries as to whether you're a delegate or just simply a representative. And as I said, we could get rid of politicians if you want and have that sort of delegated system. But as things become more and more complex, the role of the politician is to try to understand the nuances and understand it moves forward. And I'm sorry, it's wrong if you feel you're being dismissed. And one of the criticisms I have of the current government, and I'm sure I did it, others do it, of politicians in general, is the idea of dismissing, of not engaging, of not at least acknowledging what's going on. Because guess what? I don't know where the perfect laws and perfect bills and perfect policies, they were all done before I got there. Because everyone that I did, even giving people money, and I don't mean that in a stupid way, I just, we're going to have a grant program of $10 million, and you phone up the people that have been lobbying for it, and they say, why isn't it 20 million? I mean, you're always going to have people who are unhappy with what you do, and I think it's worth acknowledging to say, look, we were able to do 10 million, I wish it was more, as opposed to fighting with them. So.
But I'll just take on the C9 piece, because I just testified at the Senate on Thursday on C9 to try to restore the religious text to good faith opinion defense, which had been struck. But all those letters and commitments and the bishops and the various, that was effective, because before third reading of the bill in the House, they strengthened the definition of hatred, brought back the notion of an intense animosity or intense hatred to the bill, so the definition was tightened. They restored the requirement for leave of the Attorney General, which they had originally got rid of. But they didn't bring back the good faith religious text defense, because that was part of their deal with the Bloc to get their 22 votes in order to get the bill passed in the House. Now with the Senate's had their hearing. They're going to go clause by clause on Monday. They'll be sending it back. There is some pressure to try to get the bill back and signed if the Senate approves it. But I think there was enough, again, the same pressure was being brought to bear by the various groups, including me from my group and others, to effectively say that when we brought in hate speech in 1970 from the Cohen Commission, it was always understood it had to be linked with defense based on religious understanding. Because otherwise, the way Mark Miller talked about it at the hearings, was to say, well, look, Leviticus is clearly hateful, shouldn't be allowed. Well, that's a simplistic view of a broader understanding of a scriptural reference, but that said, that led to pushback, that led to others people are paying attention. So they do listen. You've sat in committees and had impact, I'm sure, over how bills get, through the sausage factory of legislation making. But my comment is that we're still fighting that. In the same way that we're fighting, the mental illness as a sole criteria for euthanasia, that's still a live issue, very much live. And there's hearings going on about that as well. So I don't think it's a situation where politicians don't listen. If they see that feedback and recognizing every letter represents maybe 20 or 50 other constituents who have the same view, those things have an impact, they really do. And it did in this case. The original bill from Minister Fraser to what is now before the Senate is a rather different beast. And it may change before it gets into law.
And just because it passes doesn't mean it won't get repealed, like the hate speech provision in the community.
No, I'll take it a step further. If they pass this without that defense, there's going to be a charter challenge because it was approved in Keekstra in 1990. Why? Because it had the religious defense.
So with that, we're over time. So can you just thank our panelists?